stuff. I always like to do that. Save the really good stuff for the times when hardly anybody's here. But two people who are hardly ever here are here, so hey, that's great. Okay, so, and I'll leave plenty of time for questions. But I want to talk about, so we've looked at Nitche's explanation for why it is that anybody might think, well, it's good to be poor in spirit, or indeed good to be poor, not to have a lot of money, not to be worldly successful. Why would anybody think that? Nitche gives us a story, right, which I think is a very enlightening story. But he also has another story, which we just touched on last time. So, and that's the story about how we got our rational part. So you remember, so if we're looking, so this is true of all of the thinkers. Normally I draw motivational stuff this way, but I'm going to draw something else. I'll kind of make it a slightly different shape. There. That's what it looks like. And what is that? Well, that's our soul. And so we've got two parts. This is the rational part. And that's Plato's logistikon, the rationally calculative part, Aristotle's nous, understanding. So if we're Plato, it's the logistikon. If we're Aristotle, nous. And if we're Kant, that's the noumenal. The noumenal part of us, right? The part that's outside the grip of the causal forces that would otherwise make us unfree. So this is the free part of us. And so they all see all of them see these as Aristotle talks about being the divine thing, the theon, the divine thing in us. And Plato too talks about it as being the most godlike part of us. And Kant, of course, thinks that the gods are noumenal beings, right? They don't have any natural part that's subject to Newton's laws. And you might think, gee, gosh, isn't that an amazing thing? That we have a little spark of the divine in us. That's handy. I wonder how we got it. Well, so of course, one of the stories is, well, we kind of got it by, well, a miracle, right? God put it in there. And you can see the influence of this thought if you just think back to a central problem for us, a central ethical problem for us, one that divides our nation politically and ethically, is the question of abortion. Right? So suppose you left religion out of it altogether, as the ancients did, so they didn't think about God putting things into fetuses at some stage. So Aristotle set up the doctrine that presided for quite a long time, namely that it isn't until so-called quickening, or as we would say, until the fetus has a central nervous system and a developed cerebral cortex, it isn't until then that it's killing a person or killing a human in the sense in which it's murdered. Right? Now, before that, so in fact, even, well, I won't go into the details, but it's going to complicate it. But anyway, that's the sort of picture. But if you weren't thinking about God doing something, you might just think, well, first trimester abortions are very different from subsequent abortions because the fetus is much more developed after that. In fact, in some cases, you might think it's actually capable of autonomous actually take it out of its mother's womb and keep it in an incubator. Why, right? Why worry about it? So premature babies, right, are born very early. How early does it have to get? At some point in there, you would think, no, that's not just a fetus, that's a baby. But notice that if you think that God puts a rational soul into a fetus at the moment maybe of conception, then you have a very different picture of what you're doing with it. It's already got a spark of the divine on it. And that's why it's wrong to kill it. It's wrong. Why is it okay to kill animals if you think it is? A lot of people say, well, they don't have a soul. They don't have a rational soul. That's why it's okay to kill them. Why is it not okay to kill you? You do have a rational soul. Notice the big divide, right? And so if you think that a fetus at the moment, or an ovum at the moment of conception, acquires a rational soul because God puts it in there, then you start to worry, right? Now, why God would be stupid enough to put a rational soul into something that he knew was going to get aborted is a different question, and I don't want to go there, though I do sometimes use it to provoke people who tell me that God puts a rational soul in things. So that's the worry. But notice, so now when we look down here, we have, for example, the natural part. And that's the part, that's what Plato and Aristotle call it. And for Kant, it's the determined. Kant. So I'll Newton once we're down in here. So that's the picture. And as you can imagine, you might think that you can imagine Nitche, just as he sort of think when everybody was listening to the Sermon on the Mount and they got to the part of how blessed were the pure in spirit, they might have thought that it was a comedic routine and they'd all start laughing, right? And the next part would be, and then you've got to give away everything you own to the poor, and then they laugh even more because they think, why would is this guy trying to be funny? This is ridiculous, right? But instead, as Nitche says, that's not the reaction that he got. And part of the reason for that is that the people who were hearing the sermon were themselves ready to believe it. So now you can imagine Nitche thinking, here's somebody who comes up and says, you look out gorillas and higher apes. They're an awful lot like us. In fact, their genetic material is about 99% overlap with ours. Huge percentage of their genetic material is just like ours. They have very large brains and other things, right? They're capable of all kinds of stuff, right? And, well, we're just like them. Except that in addition to all that machinery, which we get from nature, we're also lucky enough, as they, alas, are not, right, to get an extra little bit that does not come from nature at all, but that God comes in sort of goes, like stardust, right, a little. And now what's true? Now you're a little reflection of God. A monkey, no matter how sophisticated it is, doesn't reflect the divine at all. You, though, do. Why? You got the magic dust. That's the... now you can imagine Nitche starting to laugh as the thought is, but how did we ever get so we could believe some nonsense like this is just not worth even listening to? That's the thought, ha ha ha, but we don't. In fact, it's not just that we philosophers don't laugh at it, but actually we use it. All of us do. Use it to justify all kinds of incredibly complicated social practices. Like, for example, we really don't. How many of you are meat eaters? I don't need to know. How many of you are meat eaters, for example? You don't think twice about it. If you are, you think it's perfectly all right to kill complicated creatures like cows and eat them. But if I said, look, actually newborn babies taste much better, and there are an awful lot of them, really, that are going to just grow up to have terrible lives. Why don't we just, as Jonathan Swift proposed, why don't we just cook them and eat them? Christmas is coming. Nice little plump baby is just as good as a turkey, and cheaper. You may just happen to have one lying around. Or your neighbor might have one they don't want. You know, just rush in, get it, barbecue it. But we think that would be terrible. Right? Absolutely unspeakable. If you did that, you would definitely deserve to go to jail. recently microwaved its baby. What? I know people are just out of. There's nothing you can imagine that is even close to what people have actually done. So, you know, it's terrible, right? And we think those people should just be put in jail, or anyway, they need medical treatment or something. But if they did that to their dog, we might think, oh, they're not very nice people. And we might even, there are probably some small laws that they break by treating an animal cruelly. But if they just shot the dog, that would be okay, right? So we have big distinctions that we draw on the basis of a picture of ourselves that's like this. And Nitche now is going to tell us a little story. And the story tells, we haven't, unless you've been very good students and you've all rushed ahead to read the second two essays of the genealogy of morals, which I recommend, they're great. They're kind of complicated, like the first one, you have to unravel them quite a lot. But here's an essence of the story. So you start with the blonde beasts again. You start with this warrior tribe. And these warriors are appetitive people. That's the start, is they're just out for food, drink, and sex. They're like Plato's money lovers. And when they get a chance to get a lot of it for free, they take it. So when they find a weak bunch of farmers that they can enslave and then do whatever they like with, they do it. And now they're as happy as can be. They're not thinking something like this. Maybe we should learn geometry, right? Right? They're not, or maybe we should understand the nature of the universe. Right, again, if you were to propose that one of them should stop eating, drinking, and having sex, and, you know, pillaging and raping, and start turning his mind over to reading Kant or something, right, you know, you'd get a belly laugh, and maybe you'd get a bullet in the head or a spear in the gut, too, just to go along with them for making ridiculous suggestions to people, right? This is the way to live. You can get, if you can live this way, why would you want to live any other way? And of course, we can see lots and lots of people in our own world who would agree with them. Well, this is what life is all about. You only do that other stuff to get more of this good stuff. Right. So how did blonde beasts become philosophers? Well, not all at once. That's right. It took a long time, and it didn't come from the blonde beasts right away. Right? It came from the influence of the slaves on the blonde beasts. So the slaves, remember, got smarter and smarter. And they didn't get smarter and smarter because they thought, oh gosh, it's so great to think about metaphysics or ethics or something like that. No, they got smarter and smarter because they wanted revenge. They got smarter and smarter because they were driven by resentment to indulge in fantasies of revenge. It wasn't very nice, right? They were hating and loathing and telling themselves long stories about one day their prince would come, right, and overthrow the blonde beasts and make them the rulers. Yay! So they did all that developing of their minds, not because they had a spark of the divine already in them, but was urging, right, to express itself. They did it all because they wanted something. They wanted the food, drink, and sex that the masters had. They wanted the power that the masters had. That's just why they did it. But the result was, right, that after a while they got very good at it, right? Right? And as they more and more intellectual-like tasks were alienated onto them, right, they were able to, now think about it this way, think about how difficult it is to focus your mind on anything, right? If it really interests, excites you, and so on already, it's easy. So when you go to a kind of entertaining movie, you're not all the time thinking, gee, I wish this damn thing be over. Right? But when you're in a class or reading a piece of the fundamental groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, right, you find your mind was flickering off it all the time, right? You read a sentence and then you have a little fantasy to make up for the pain that comes just caused you, and then you read another one and it goes on like that. Now by the time you've got to the end of page one, you can't remember anything that's on it, right? You've all been through this. You've been look, I've been disciplining my thought for, God knows, 50 years, right? And I'm pretty good at it now. But even I do that, right? I flicker off on the things, so I surf the web while I'm doing some Aristotle or whatever, right? I don't think, oh yeah, so you should play that. Right? We all do that. That's the nature of our being. So Aristotle, Nitche sees it this way. Think of the pain, suffering, and discipline It took it had to be inflicted, the tortures that had to be inflicted on creatures like us to get us to be able to do what you're doing. Sitting in a desk, listening to the guy blathering on about this stuff, without, as the students of the great Irish philosopher Scotus Regan did, one day he bored them so much that as one man, this is the story, they were all males of course, as one man, all at once they stood up and stabbed him to death with their pens. I'm sure you felt like that sometimes. I hope not towards me, but I've certainly felt it in class. If I had a gun, I would shoot this guy. So he says, if and only if, one more time. Right, or what? Whatever it is, I'm going to kill him. Okay, so to get us, our minds disciplined, first for us to get minds, even vestigial minds, that are actually doing something that isn't directed immediately to satisfying our appetites, we have to imagine them emerging, as Nitche does, from a context in which it's in our interest, right, to develop our minds. And that, as we see in the little story about the farmers, comes when they spend a lot of time fantasizing, developing stories and art, and they slowly but surely become better at it. And then we end up in the third essay with, as he calls, the ascetic ideal. So people who are so good at pushing aside their appetites that they can keep them at bay for very long periods while they focus on things like nuclear physics, mathematics, ethics, right? They can write books and so on. Why? Because their appetites have been disciplined enough that they won't intervene. So just think about it. Think about small children. So if you happen to have a class full of small children, how difficult it is to hold their attention to get them from stopping to running around. As soon as an urge hits them, whatever it is, they run off and do it. It's very, very hard to get them to pay attention to anything for more than a few minutes. By the time you're your age, allegedly your attention span has risen to the extraordinary length of 15 minutes. Anything after 15 minutes, you forget it, right? The idea that, for example, and you run into it with graduate students, 2.5-hour seminar, people are usually wilting by a certain, so you have to refresh them with coffee and other stuff halfway through, otherwise the idea that you could do this for hours on end, days on end, without maybe sleeping, right? And there are people who are like this, right? Driven by the need to discover just why it is that these two chemicals interact the way they do, right? That takes an incredible amount of discipline, and that discipline emerged out of this long history. It isn't that God put an already disciplined little rational part in us, it's that we are the descendants of creatures. So the slaves not only gave us human rights and all of those other things, but they also gave us our minds. We thinkers, as Nitche said, remember the first sentence of the genealogy, we do not know who we are, we seekers after knowledge, because we've never gone in search of ourselves. Now he's gone in search, and what he finds is, it's not like this. God didn't put an already formed little rational part in us that by nature just did all this stuff, mathematics, history, philosophy, just by nature it did it. No, now we have to discover that powers in our brains by getting developed discipline, by subordinating others, a big battle, right? We discovered we ended up with minds, rational parts to our soul. So that's a huge change, right? We're now looking at ourselves in a quite different way. And then Nitche says the following, right? Well, now that we know what we're like, right, we're not chips off the divine block, we're rather complicated animals that have gone through a long process of socialization. And we can ask ourselves about all of these things, not this. Not like this. God hath so, do not weave your shirt of 2 threads. You got it? That's the end of it. God hath so, that's enough for you. Right? God hath said, do not eat the rock badger. Right? That's the end of it. There's no further exploration that you should be doing. You're hearing it. Nitche says, well, that's preposterous. Right? There's no source of authority like that anywhere, right? There there isn't even a source of authority quite like that in us. Okay? So, instead we have to ask a different question about all the values we've inherited, which is Nietzsche's question. What is their value? What's the point of these things that we've got? And we all, as Thrasymachos says, yeah, of course, we all sign off on these things. Is it good to be just? Yes. Is it better to be just than rich? Yes. Is it good to be pious? Yes. Is it good to be, right? Why? Why do we give all those answers and give them so readily? Well, Nitche, Thrasymachos tells us one story. He said, well, look, we've been culturated, right, to have values. They're not guaranteed to be in our interest. They might be, but they're not guaranteed to be because we're not the sources of them. Instead, they have their source in the powerful rulers who make rules in social institutions, reward and punish. And Nitche tells an elaborate version of that story to tell us in more detail how we got the very values that we got, how they got their contents. Right? So when he says, okay, so now since we know that the mere fact that we have them is not a reason to value them. Some of them might be great, some of them might be terrible, but the mere fact that we have them, or that we think yes to them, isn't a reason all by itself to say these are the best, these are the good values. Instead, we have to submit them to scrutiny. So now the question is, so when we ask about the rational part on its reasons, now we get to the paper topic, right? We've got eudaimonistic. Considerations, and that's Plato and Aristotle. And we've got so-called deontological. Well, we don't know what that means, we don't care. Kant. That is, whatever you think Kant's account is of these things, that it's supposed to not be eudaimonistic. Right? And but the two views are, well, those are the two kinds of reasons that there are, and each group, Plato and Aristotle, want to say, you only have a practical reason to do something if it promotes, or best promotes, your happiness. Or happiness is to be understood in various ways, and we'll talk about that in a sec. And Kant says it's got nothing to do with happiness at all. It's simply, as you were asking at the beginning, it's simply that. All you have to do is think about the fact that these practical reasons are reasons. And then what you discover is that since a reason for anybody is a reason for everyone, when you treat something as a reason, a practical reason, Kant says, think about it this way. Think about just by treating it that way, you put it in everyone's motivational stuff. Then they will all act on that reason. If now you lose your reason to do things, that's a practical contradiction. So think of the very simple case again. I know this stuff on Kant can be a little bit difficult. But think about the simple case again of cheating at cards. The only reason to cheat is that you think it will help you to win. If everybody cheats, I don't know if you know cards, that'll put that off, right? Or cheating won't get you to win. So you lose the mere making it a reason. Whenever I want to win at cards, I will cheat. I put that in everyone's motivational stuff. Then I no longer have that reason to cheat. Then it's a practical contradiction, right? By making it a reason, I've undermined the reason itself. That's the Kantian thought, formal. So now, when we ask, so I'm going to take you to this place. I don't expect that you'll all just see it. This is hard. This part is a little bit hard. I think moral thinking is still not really caught up to us in a way that makes it just simple. But let me just tell you a little bit about it, and then we'll stop and see if there are questions. So there are the two kinds of reasons, the eudaimonistic reasons and the deontological reasons. And in the eudaimonistic side, there's a nice little bit which goes like this, right? And I just think of it, right? We start by doing practical reasoning in order to get the things we want, right? So practical reasoning is not something we do, as we say, for its own sake. At first, we do practical reasoning to get the things we want. So we do a little bit of reasoning about how to get some fresh eggs because we want to make a souffle. We don't just think. I think I'll do some practical reasoning about how to get some fresh eggs, right? But when we do it, when we start solving practical puzzles, right, one possibility is that we start to like it. Right? We enjoy it. And look at how much we do of it, just for its own sake, right? Puzzles. Crossword puzzles, puzzles of all kinds, Rubik cubes, right? Various kinds of electronic games. They challenge us to solve them, and we like that. So we just do it for its own sake, right? It's not about getting eggs anymore. It's about doing this stuff, right? So when we're over here, right, with the eudaimosis, so now we start with practical reasoning. First, for the sake of something else, and then for its own sake, if we enjoy it. Now, so it doesn't, just because you go in for some practical reasoning, it may just always be with you like this. I do it when I have to, but God, I hate it. It's such a pain having to use your mind like that. Right? It would be so much better if stuff just fell out of the sky, right? But instead you have to think about it, and you know, that's costly and stressful, and I'm not very good at it, and I make mistakes. And the other person is thinking, yeah, we've got a problem? Okay, let me help you solve that, right? What are the issues again? Let me, well, you should do this and this and this and this, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I actually have never looked under the hood of my car. I'm confident there's something in there. I don't want to know what it is, right? And when it doesn't start, if I could fix it by doing that, I would. I'm not interested in discovering how all the parts fit together and how. There are people I pay a lot of money to in order to do that. When it doesn't work, I drive it to the shop, and there's a guy there, and he opens up the hood, and he looks in there, and he does a bunch of this stuff, and then he says, yeah. You need a new, that'll be $873.19 with tax. Yeah. Okay. Right. That's it. I'm not interested in, but some people just love it. Like, so if you're, you know, the guy next door who's into cars, you know, he sees the hood up, he rushes over. Because it's just the very idea that you've got a car problem is for him an opportunity to use his vast knowledge of mechanics, right, to help you with it, right? And just the same way, some people love doing philosophical things, right? They see somebody working on a philosophical argument and they want to get involved. Right, that's not cool. You need to put premise in there. Where did you get this from? All right. Same. Okay, you with me? So, right, and then there's the other part, which is when you start doing theoretical stuff, you inevitably run into considerations that are the beginnings of theoretical reasoning, right? So, part of your practical reasoning is something like this. Yeah, I was thinking of having a souffle for dinner. I wonder if that many eggs are good for me. Now, it's not a practical question. For that, you've got to go over to the dietitians or, you know, whatever, the people who work on these things, who, you know, maybe your doctor, who tells you whether it's good for you or not. Whether you act on it or not is another question, right? And then there are others like this. You know, do I think it's going to rain tomorrow? Can be a big issue on whether or not I harvest the crops today or I wait. And that's not a practical question either. That's a question about meteorology and a whole lot of other stuff. Unfortunately, since meteorologists are right about the same number of times as chance. They slightly improve on the 50-50, but not a lot more than that. Especially as it runs out into the future, right, as it gets closer. I love it when it's actually pouring rain outside and they say, 60% chance of rain. You think, I wonder how much it would be raining if there was 100% chance of rain. Okay, all right. So this we can think of as leading to theoretical reasoning, which is just for finding out the truth. Right? And so that leads to this, and then if that's enjoyed, right, you do it, for instance. If, right? So you start by doing some practical reasoning and you think, gosh, I really like this, I love solving puzzles. And then you find that in your practical reasoning occur questions that are not themselves practical, right? They're theoretical questions. And so you go off and investigate them, and maybe you find it boring, in which case you hope you can outsource it, somebody else will do it for you, right? But it may be that you think, gosh, that's even more interesting than solving this kind of puzzle, right? I really want to know, how does food nourish you? How do eggs become flesh? God, I have no idea. I really want to investigate that, right? What happens when I digest my food? How is it that some things become fat, other things become muscle? I want to know the answer to those questions. Inquiring minds want to know. Well, only some, though. Others think, I don't give a damn how it happens. It's like me with my car, right? I don't care how internal combustion engines work. I just want mine to work. Right? That's it. I feel pretty much the same about what goes on under here. For ages, I thought I was homogeneous throughout. I don't think that. I just thought, now you discover there's all kinds of junk in there that goes wrong, and you have to, fix it. I would be quite happy if it would all work by miracle, right? There's nothing in there. God just makes it work. Great. I'll feel even better. Okay. With me? Okay, so that's this little story. And then there's another little story, which is added by Plato and Aristotle. Naturally, they're philosophers, right, as Nitche would say. Well, what did you expect them to like? Eating? They put here they're running schools, they've made big reputations for themselves doing what? Philosophy. And what did they say is the best kind of life? You'll never guess. Golfing. No. Philosophy. Right? So notice that they're going to do this. They're going to say, right, this is most pleasant. But you could accept the eudaimonistic picture that practical reasons are all about what gives you happiness and pleasure, though you disagree about which those things are. Plato and Aristotle have two views. Right? One, that all practical reasons are eudaimonistic, and the other is that eudaimonia is the best kind of it. The most pleasant activities are theoretical activities. But you need not necessarily agree with that last one in order to be a eudaimonist. And Kant has this rather strange thing, right, which is reason for everyone. Reason is reason for everyone. Practical reason what is it? Well, again, you make a consideration, any consideration, a practical reason. A reason for you to do what you're doing. Right? It's okay to do that if it really is a reason. And here's a way to test whether it is one or not. Right? Think that when you put it in your own motivational stuff, it automatically goes into everyone. So like they've all got it now. And if it's still a reason after that, then it's fine. But if you just made it subvert itself, then it's no longer a reason. Now the question is, which reasons are those? Kant has a view about them, right? He tells you one of them is never lie, the other is don't commit suicide. There are a lot of things that he thinks are reasons by that requirement. So if you say, you know, I'm bored with life, I'm going to kill myself, and what is my reason? Well, I think anyone who's as bored with life as I am should kill themselves too, and that goes in everyone's motivational set. Kant thinks it now shows, not quite clear how, but he thinks that shows that it undermines itself. Nobody would want that. I mean, you could maybe think this, the whole of life would be destroyed when I will, but that just doesn't seem, it's got to be a contradiction. I lose it as my reason. Right? Not that it would be unconscionable, I wouldn't like it. What about never lie? Well, again, Kant thinks that passes his test, right? But nobody else does, or only a few Kantians. Most of us think no. So there's a problem in Kant that there isn't directly in Plato and Aristotle of actually saying, what are the practical reasons? I'm telling you what it is for something to be one, but which ones are and which ones aren't, that turns out to be, as we saw, a very hard question. So that's the whole picture. And Nietzsche now looks at all of these, this whole story, and first of all he notices, I mean, I think this is especially obvious in Kant, that Kant's examples never lie, never commit suicide, I'll tell you, and I might have mentioned this, but I think it's one that shows you as quite revelatory. Of course, Nietzsche looks for these. So Kant, like indeed the Catholic philosopher St. Thomas Aquinas, both of these thinkers, I think, I don't know, maybe I've mentioned this, but I can't remember whether I did or let me mention it now. Right, so which of the following do you think is worse? Do you think it's worse that masturbation is a bigger crime, or raping a virgin was a bigger crime? How many people think that masturbation is actually worse than raping a virgin? Any takers on that? What do you think Kant and St. Thomas thought? They thought it was a bigger crime. That's a bit like never lie, right? Why would anybody think that? That's kind of preposterous. I won't explain why they thought it. But Nietzsche, takes a little more, but Nietzsche says, when you look at what they actually value, that is, think of it this way, right? There's always the test, and then the things you're confident pass the test. And when the things you're confident pass the test either don't seem to pass it, or have a funny look to them, you should look at them carefully. And Nietzsche says, right, what you discover is that these are all sourced in Kant's Christian beliefs. They don't actually follow from his philosophical views at all. So Kant is looking for reasons that support his religious beliefs, but that only dubiously do so, maybe don't do so at all, indicating that it's really the beliefs that are doing the work, and the theory is only there to kind of give them an appearance. That's probably cruel to Kant, but there's some truth in it. So what Nietzsche thinks is, okay, this picture, the eudaimonistic picture, is better. It's a better account of practical reasons than Kant's picture. But there are elements in it that we should be cautious about. So when, for example, we're told that theoretical reasoning is the most pleasant, and that the appetites in the body and all of those things are disparaged and downplayed, right? Those aren't those important. We should cast a cold eye on that. We shouldn't be so quick to denigrate our bodies and our physical pleasures as Plato and Aristotle think. We should be more careful. Why should we? Well, Nietzsche notices another fact, and this is the part that can you either will get or you won't. It's kind of a little bit difficult for us. So, and we'll go over here. We'll do it. Plato, Aristotle, and Kant all believe, in different ways, but they all believe that the natural world, the world we live in, is in some way a good, favorable world. So here's the thought, right? God made it. Remember, at the beginning of the Bible, God created the world and he saw that it was good. So the thought is, it's a good old world out there. Right? It's a good, favoring world. It's not a hostile world. And all of them, all three thinkers, hold that view. They all think, yes, this is, so to speak, this world is kind of a little bit, at least, on the side of ethical goodness, either because all of it is, or because there's this element in it that's there that can try to turn, as Kant uses this thing, says, try to make the kingdom of earth into the kingdom of heaven, right? Use reason to reshape all these things. And that's, the world is kind of hospitable to nature's endeavors to make a place good for human beings, good for reason. So this is the model that I like, this is the way I like to explain it. They all thought that they were living in a 19th century novel. Right? They all thought that the whole thing had a plot. They even talk about the book of the world, right? So God wrote two books, the Bible and the book of the world, from which we can infer a lot about the Creator from the creation, right? It's as if there's an author. The whole thing has a plot, a structure. It's all, as we want to say, going somewhere. And where was it going? Well, for Plato and Aristotle, we don't hear about this in the books of theirs that they read. They both have rather strange views, which I'll spare you. But essentially, our rational part is eternal and leaves the body behind at the end when we die and becomes part of a kind of celestial order of things, a bit like the Christian heaven, right? We're going to be part of the really good stuff eventually. In Plato, you might have to go through a series of reincarnations before you get purged of all the fleshy stuff, and then, bang, you're off in the celestial sphere contemplating God or the good or whatever. And that's very much a kind of version of the Christian heaven, right? We're all going somewhere. And when we get there, the whole novel will have reached its end. It's a bit like, and they all lived happily ever after. In a way, that is the end of the story, right? The last trump sounds, game over. Some go up, some go down, some go in between and then go up. And that's the end. And then we all live, well, the good ones live happily ever after, and the bad ones live miserably ever after, right? Which is just as it should be. The white hats dominate the black hats, right? In the story, the good guys win. Are you with me? Okay, so when Nitche says this, yes, well, it'd be nice if it were true. But it's not true. Why? Well, look, here's the bad news. You probably don't need it. You can read it on the front pages of the newspaper. We're not going anywhere. Well, that's not quite true, right? We're not going anywhere except into the ground, right? We're all going to just die, and that's the end of each one of us. But it's not just us. It's the whole thing. The Earth, the solar system, it's all going to collapse into a black hole. It'll start with the supernova for us, with maybe it'll be all over for us before this happens. Climate change or nuclear war or something will destroy the planet. But even if that doesn't happen, eventually the sun will supernova, the Earth will spiral into it, right? That'll be the end of everything in the solar system. And then eventually all the solar systems, all of these things, all of these, will just all collapse into a great big black hole, right? A very dense chunk of stuff. Everything, all the information will be collapsed, destroyed, there'll be not a rack behind, and then bang! There'll be another explosion and maybe a new universe, maybe not. Grim. as bad news. There's no end to the story, it just finishes. Right? It's as if when you get to the last page of the novel, it says, right, it ends in mid-sentence, page 763, and then no, there's nothing. Right? So Nitche says, yeah, well, first thing you've got to do is get used to that. So, I'm sure you've already gotten used to it. That's the truth, as Nitche says. That's how it's going to be. So now, just think about that. And moreover, there's nothing special about human beings. Right? It might go like this. All the human beings end up getting destroyed, as I like to think, by the supercomputers that they've made, that just find the human beings, after a while, kind of tedious, a little too smart to keep as pets. They're always breaking out of the cages, not really smart enough to want to talk to. So just let them die, or euthanize them. And so the supercomputers that we've made, that have now learned to program themselves, they just take over. Another new rational beings, supercomputers. Right? And they operate on, we, like the dinosaurs, have become part of history. So Nitche says, get used to that idea. Now, what are you thinking? What is there to be on the side of? Where, if you're not all heading for your, sort of the happiness of you and all humankind, as Plato and Aristotle thought, or you're not all headed for the kingdom of heaven, as Kant thought, if only you follow the right practical reasons. What are you on? What should you be on the side of? What should you be aiming at? Where should you be, how should you be orienting your life? And Nitche says, well, you should be an Übermensch. What does that mean? Well, it's usually translated Superman, which to me brings in pictures of guys in cloaks flying through the air. Right? Is it a plane? Is it a bird? I don't think that's what Nitche has in mind. Right? It's rather this: we should be Overmen. I should be Übermenschen. When the Germans sing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, they mean Deutschland, Deutschland over everything, right? And of course you can, that has an aggressive sound, but for Nitche it's just this. Get used to the idea that actually you're a bridge over which things will cross into a future that may not have you in it. You may be not the end of anything, but the bridge to the next thing, whatever it is. And what should you then be thinking? What should you be the bridge to? Well, I think I'm going to leave that question hanging, right? And just to say that it's become a really deep, practical question. It says, well, if we're not, it's not just this, that there's this kind of picture of a kind of closure to the whole system, in which all the good people end up in paradise and all the bad people end up in hell, or some such picture as that. There isn't a kind of final dispensation, right? So that ethics pays off, so to speak, even if you have to value it for its own sake, to have the payoff, but it pays off in the sense that you'll all end up, ethically, the good people all end up in a good place. And they just stay there forever, and that's the end of it. Instead, you have to ask, well, what does ethics put you on the side of? And I think part of the answer is just this. Well, this is the way Aristotle puts it. He says, what's white for a day is no less white than what is white for 1,000 years. You don't get whiter by living longer, right? Things can be white for a very short time, but can be, as it were, perfectly or wholly white. You don't get whiter by being longer. So one thing to do is to think that you ought to put a lot more weight on things that, right, have their value now and don't wait to get it later. And so you should be more focused on things that are intrinsically valuable, so that you get the value payoff now, than in things that are extrinsically valuable that only become valuable if they get rewarded later. So notice, for example, well, don't go in for poverty and poverty of spirit. Why? Well, those only get their rewards later. right, under a divine dispensation. But everything else that's intrinsically good is valuable and worth doing anyway, even if, so to speak, the world would end tomorrow. So let me give an example, and then you'll see what I have in mind. So you've got this, I don't know what but suppose you've got this great bottle of wine that you've been aging in your cellar, and it's just moving into its drink-by date, you know. And you hear on the news that, well, yeah, the North Koreans have launched a big pile of ballistic missiles. They're on their way. And actually, bad news, they've managed to screw up our missile control system because they hacked into the computers that do it. And so our missile defense shield is not going to work. So we've got about, 16 hours before they get here. Some of them are all going to land on Washington, D.C., which you might think is not such a bad thing. It could just selectively deal with some of the inhabitants. But missiles are a bit indiscriminate, so I'm afraid, it's not good for us. So you've got this great bottle of wine. Do you think you've just lost the reason to drink it? Because, well, look, the world is going to end tomorrow, chances are, for you anyway. So you shouldn't, so now it's not worth drinking the wine? Of course it's worth drinking the wine. It's yet more worth drinking the wine. Pick a few others. What about making love to your beloved? Should you think it's not worth having sex anymore because, tomorrow there'll be nothing? Or what about eating a really good dinner? No, I say all these things. Or listening to the music you love the most. Or reading again those poems that you like. Or quickly finishing the novel that is so great that you can't. None of these things lose their meaning or point because, tomorrow there'll be nothing. And I think it's very important. One of the things that the picture of getting all the rewards later gives you is a picture that you should postpone gratification, that it's a good reason to think, I shouldn't do this now, even though it'd be really pleasant, because later I'm going to get a much bigger reward. This moves us towards front-loading our practical reasons, not end-loading them. I actually find this a good result, not a bad one. Of course, that's quite true that even on the other picture, the intrinsically valuable things are better to go for. But even if the world will end tomorrow, even if it's not going anywhere, even if, as I think, we're just so damn lucky that evolutionary processes resulted in self-conscious beings like us, and not just that, because that could be dreadful. If you're a self-conscious being in the torture chamber of the KGB, it's terrible to be self-conscious. But actually, most of us, and I mean us, are lucky enough that self-consciousness is actually pretty much a good thing for us if it is. It makes available to us all kinds of really great things that we actually have access to. So for us, it's a blessing, maybe, but not for everybody. Certainly not for people who are suffering precisely because they're sophisticated, self-conscious beings. Then self-consciousness can become a nightmare from which you'd welcome release by suicide if you could manage it. So that's the bottom line of the three stories that we told. They're not the only ones, but they are actually big shaping stories of the way we should think about ethics. A lot of ethics is still under the grip of what I call closure. It's under the grip of the idea that, we're in an 18th century novel. That is, that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it all makes sense, and it's all tied up with a nice bow at the end, and they all live happily ever after is the bottom line of it. And I don't think that that's a credible story anymore. So we have to tell ourselves a different one. And that's Nietzsche's thought about how we should value many of the things that we've inherited, but not on the grounds that they were valued by those who passed them on to us. Almost all of them told us one or another versions of the Kant, Plato, Aristotle story. So those three are the dominant narratives, I think, of our ethical lives. Okay, so let me stop. That's it. In a way, that's the end. That's the end, and unfortunately I can't say, and we all lived happily ever after, though of course I hope we do. So, any questions about this or the paper or anything? We'll spend the last 20 minutes or so on those, if there are any. Yeah? Yeah?
Kind of switching gears to the conversation between Kant and Aristotle.
Yeah.
So with Aristotle and the noumenal and the empirical will acting in accordance with each other, that's something we want, and that's like harmony. But what if they don't, like, is it not harmony if they don't act in accordance with each other?
It's a very good question. In fact, the very possibility of harmony is itself a really good question. So because, after all, what is to ensure? So Kant, this is where Kant's notion of Achtung, or respect, comes in. So Kant needs, apparently, but not clear that he can legitimately have, something in the natural world that's responsive to noumenal reasons. Otherwise, the noumenal reasons just float away from the natural world. They don't get a grip on it at all. But you could ask yourself then, what happens if instead of having Achtung, or respect, in your motivational set, which is just a determined fact about you, it's just a result of nature, nothing is ensuring it. Instead you have nausea, of practical reasons. So where one person looks at the starry heavens above, or the moral law within, and says, the other goes, right? Well, suppose you're one of the ones. That's not your fault. Nature just wired you up that way. How can you be to blame? But notice for Kant, right, a big requirement of the whole system was to avoid the thing I've avoided mentioning. Namely, that everybody faces judgment, and nobody escapes because they've been sort of wired up wrong. Right? So that's the elitist issue that is right on the heart of Kant's rejection of the Platonic and Aristotelian picture. Is that for Plato and Aristotle, moral reasons only motivate those people who find enjoyable this whole kettle of fish. And that's only a small number of people. The rest basically are ethical to the degree that they are, only because of the threats and rewards that they get. I don't know, it's not such a terrible result. You might think actually that's a truer picture of our actual moral situation. The idea that we're all kind of in the grip of it, which is, I think, lots and lots of people would say that the only reason to be moral is that if you're not, they catch you. It's bad news. There's no other reason. I was teaching a huge class, 200 undergraduates, freshmen and sophomores mostly, and we got to this point, and I said, some people are just moral because of the rewards, the fear of the police, and so on, a program being caught, but otherwise they wouldn't do it. And someone just sort of like an outburst. But of course that's the right picture. I mean, how could anybody be so stupid as to, right? It was like, you're telling us it's not like that, but of course it's like that, right? And the only reason that I don't commit those sins is I'm afraid of getting caught, or somebody will see me, or I'm ashamed, or any one of those things. But if that wasn't part of it, if I had the ring of Gyges, man, I'd be cracking me on jaws. And I think that's a real picture to worry about. So they say, yeah, well, if you get a good police force, bring people up pretty decently, have good laws, have a lot. That's as good as it's going to get for most cases. Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand like why Achtung is necessary. Like, why does there have to be a connection between like noumenal and empirical?
Yeah. So I mean, I think the thought is this. So suppose you sever the connection, and in a way you can feel that in the notion that the only good thing is a good will, or only good intentions matter. But one of the reasons we're interested in ethics, right, one of the reasons I'm interested in you having a good will is what will happen if you don't. Right, so maybe you'll kill me or do something else. But suppose, as it happens, your good will is just neutral with respect to what you actually do. And your empirical will is going to determine whether you'll kill me or not. What do I care about your noumenal will, right? I want you to have the kind of empirical will that'll maybe move your hands and move you around so that it's fun to live with you rather than I have to be in fear of my life. So the whole point of ethics would kind of collapse, and I think this is a worry. It would become an issue between you and God, right? Namely, is your will good? Well, God can see. That's going to matter later. Will you go up or will you go down? But it doesn't matter to other agents, and that seems to defeat a big part of the purpose of ethics.
Yeah, I guess like that part of
Yeah.
it, and I see why Aristotle would like be concerned with
Yeah.
that because like he's
Yeah.
the entire like goal for him is like to have like
Yeah.
good life or whatever. Why does Kant care about that?
Because he feels exactly the same thing that you and I saw right now. I mean, if you were to say to Kant, listen, just pull Acton out of the damn thing. Look, it's an embarrassment anyway. You can't even really tell us what it is, a pure rational interest. You blather on about it in footnotes. You know, frankly, it just sounds like a desire. You're just trying to have your cake and eat it, aren't you? Come on, admit it. And I suppose Kant said, yeah, okay, you're right. I should really just dump it. Right? And the next worry would be, oh, you've dumped it now? Are you sure? Okay, we can cross those footnotes out. Great. Look, I see why an individual agent should worry about the quality of his numinal will because, you know, he's got a deal going with on high. But I don't see any reason at all why anyone else should care about it. Right? Nobody else should care about the quality of another agent's numinal will unless that has some effect on their empirical will. So, for example, it's not going to help me one iota to know that you've got a good numinal will, because that doesn't tell me anything about what kind of a person you are or what you're going to do. But ethics seems to at least require that we have some, so now it looks like you're going to have numinal ethics and then natural ethics. The stuff over here about getting on with each other and running communities, and one's going to have nothing to do with the other. So why then should I worry down here in the natural world about whether my practical reasons satisfy the categorical imperative? That's all about up there. Your numinal reasons should satisfy the, I've got to, but since they have no effect on your practical, your natural reasons, maybe you should just think this way. Yeah, so I'm very careful to form those things that way. But down here I just lie when it seems like it's going to promote happiness the best. Though of course I never intend that up here. But I've discovered that one has nothing to do with the other, so I'm just two-faced about everything. Yeah, I never lie. Right. Numinally, do you hear that? Thanks. Okay, gotta hold that fixed. That's my numinal intention. Never lie. Now down here. Should I tell the Nazis about my grandmother being upstairs and when she'd come looking for these nice Jews to send off to the concentration camps? Of course not. No, there are no Jews in the house. Numinally, I intended otherwise, but since my numinal will has no effect on my natural will, I don't have to worry about it. Why isn't that an option? So notice that we'd have a schizophrenic moral theory, and all the interest down here would just be on the natural will, and all the interest up there would be in the numinal will. But you could just keep saying to God, well, unfortunately, I didn't have that octane stuff, so there was nothing to make my empirical will track my numinal will, so that's why. You'd quickly find a way to exploit it. That's the way to go. Yeah.
So something that I've just been thinking
Yeah.
about is it seems like, because you know, pure de priori,
Yeah.
everything for Kant, and that's really important, but it seems like for Aristotle, so much of it is based on having empirical experience to
Yeah.
fine tune your scales and your needs. And so I'm wondering if the overall purpose of that is because Kant is looking for extrinsic values later on that are tacked on, and Aristotle needs you to live the best human life.
Yeah.
And I'm
So
wondering,
yeah, exactly. That's another sort of way of looking at the same set of issues, right? You know, that's something like this. So we looked at them, right? So when I think about what my maxims, as Kant calls them, or what my practical reasons are, I see that whether or not I can consistently will them depends a lot on empirical facts, right? So peeing in the river, right? If I live in Alaska and I'm the only person there, right? And There's just, I can pee in the river as much as I want, right? It's just not gonna do anything to the river. But if 100 million people live on the river and they all pee in it, that is gonna have a disastrous consequences for the quality of the water in the river, right? So, but how do I know where I am right in this? So notice what I can will depends a great deal. What I can make my maximum depends a whole lot on what I actually know. And others are, well,